The bullet missed Presley Novak's head by an inch, and he realized with cold certainty that coming back to Arizona had been the worst decision of his 38 years. He threw himself behind the water trough outside the Vulture City saloon, his heart hammering against his ribs as two more shots cracked through the desert air. This wasn't how he'd imagined his return to the place where he'd grown up, the dusty mining town nestled in the Vulture Mountains, where his father had built the Novak ranch from nothing but determination and sweat. He'd been gone for 20 years, making his fortune in cattle drives from Texas to Montana, building a reputation as one of the best trail bosses west of the Mississippi. Now some drunk fool with a grudge against outsiders was trying to kill him before he'd even made it to his family's old property. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it started. Presley heard boots on the wooden sidewalk, then a woman's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a knife through butter. "Luther Jensen, you put that gun down right now before I put a bullet in your backside." Presley peered around the trough. A woman stood in the middle of the street, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a split riding skirt and a white blouse with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. She held a Winchester rifle with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. The drunk man who'd been shooting at Presley was swaying on his feet, his pistol now pointed at the ground. "Miss Marlowe, this ain't your concern," Luther slurred. This stranger was asking questions about the old Novak place. "The Novak place borders my family's ranch, and that gives me every right to be concerned," the woman said, her voice steady. "Now get yourself home before I tell Sheriff Morrison you've been shooting up the street again." Luther muttered something under his breath but stumbled away down the dusty road. The woman lowered her rifle and turned her attention to Presley, who was climbing to his feet and brushing the dirt from his pants. "You all right?" she asked, walking toward him. "Thanks to you," Presley said, looking at her properly for the first time. She had striking green eyes that stood out against her sun-tanned skin, and there was something in the set of her jaw that spoke of strength and determination. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the painted ladies he'd seen in saloons from Texas to Wyoming. This was the beauty of someone who worked hard and didn't apologize for it. "You really a Novak?" she asked, studying him with those sharp eyes. "Presley Novak." "My father was Thomas Novak." Something flickered across her face, too quick for him to read. "Marlowe Edwards," she said, extending her hand. "My father was Jonathan Edwards. Our ranches shared a border." Presley shook her hand, noting the calluses on her palm, working hands. "I remember the Edwards place," he said, though in truth his memories of childhood were hazy. He'd been 18 when he left, angry at his father for reasons that seemed foolish now, eager to prove himself somewhere far from home. "Big spread with good water." "Still is," Marlowe said. "Though we've had to work hard to keep it that way. The Novak place has been empty for 15 years since your father passed. Why are you back now?" "My father left the land to me. Took 20 years for the lawyers to track me down. Figured I'd come see what's left of it." Marlowe's expression turned guarded. "There's something you should know about that land." Before she could continue, a man in a sheriff's badge came running up the street, his face red with exertion. "I heard shooting." "Marlowe, was it Luther again?" "Luther again," she confirmed. "He's headed home. This is Presley Novak, Thomas's son. He's come back to claim his father's ranch." The sheriff's eyes widened. "Novak? Well, I'll be welcome back to Vulture City, son. I'm Sheriff Morrison. Your father was a good man." "Thank you, Sheriff." "Though I should warn you," Morrison continued, glancing at Marlowe, "there's been some complications with your property. Maybe you ought to have a talk with Miss Edwards here. She can explain the situation better than I can." Presley looked between them, sensing something unspoken. "What kind of complications?" Marlowe shifted her rifle to her other hand. "It's not a conversation for the middle of the street. Come out to my ranch tonight, we'll talk over supper. I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. If you're planning to reclaim the Novak land, we need to have a serious discussion." Her tone left no room for argument. "Be there at sunset. Follow the main road north for 3 miles, you'll see the Edwards Gate." She walked away before he could respond, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Presley watched her go, feeling oddly off balance. Something about Marlowe Edwards stirred a feeling he couldn't quite name, something that had nothing to do with the mystery surrounding his father's land, and everything to do with the way she'd stood in the street with that rifle, fearless and competent. Sheriff Morrison clapped him on the shoulder. "Marlowe's a good woman, runs that ranch better than most men could. Her father died 5 years back, left her everything. She's had her share of troubles, but she's held on. She said there were complications with my land." The sheriff's face grew serious. "There are. But it's her story to tell, not mine. You'd best hear it from her." He tipped his hat. "Welcome home, Novak. Town's changed a lot since you left." Presley spent the rest of the afternoon getting himself settled at the boarding house and trying to piece together his fragmented memories of childhood. He remembered the ranch house his father had built, remembered helping with the cattle, remembered the endless Arizona sky and the way the Vulture Mountains turned purple at sunset. But he couldn't remember Marlowe Edwards, though she must have been his neighbor all those years. Had there been an Edwards girl? He had a vague recollection of seeing children at church, but the details refused to come into focus. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange, Presley saddled the horse he'd bought in Phoenix and rode north out of town. The land opened up around him, stark and beautiful in that way only the Arizona desert could be. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, and in the distance, he could see the ragged peaks of the Vulture Mountains where gold had been discovered back in the 1860s, giving birth to the town that bore their name. The Edwards Gate appeared exactly where Marlowe had said it would be, an impressive wooden structure with the ranch name burned into the crossbeam. The road beyond led through well-maintained fencing where cattle grazed on the sparse desert grass. Presley could see the care that had gone into this place, the kind of care that came from love and hard work. The ranch house was larger than he'd expected, a sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Corrals and outbuildings spread out behind it, all in good repair. This was a working ranch, prosperous despite the harsh environment. Marlowe came out onto the porch as he rode up, and Presley found himself looking at her with new appreciation. She'd changed into a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, though she still wore practical boots. Her hair was down now, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. "You're punctual," she said as he dismounted. "Put your horse in the corral, my ranch hand will see to him." A weathered Mexican man appeared from the barn and took the reins with a nod. Presley climbed the porch steps and followed Marlowe inside. The house was comfortable and well-furnished, with thick adobe walls that kept out the desert heat. The main room had a large fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and woven rugs on the floor. "Sit," Marlowe said, gesturing to the dining table. "I've got stew ready." Presley sat, watching as she brought bowls and bread to the table. There was something mesmerizing about the efficient way she moved, no wasted motion. She poured coffee from a pot on the stove and settled across from him. "All right," he said. "Tell me what's going on with my father's land." Marlowe took a sip of her coffee, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Your father and mine were friends, good friends. When you left, Thomas was heartbroken. He never said as much, but everyone could see it. He kept hoping you'd come back." Guilt twisted in Presley's gut. He'd been so angry, so convinced his father didn't understand him, didn't see who he really was. He'd wanted to prove he could make it on his own, without the Novak name, without his father's help. By the time he'd cooled down enough to think about writing, years had passed, and pride had kept him from reaching out. "He died 15 years ago," Marlowe continued. "Heart gave out while he was working the cattle. My father found him. Before he died, Thomas made my father promise something." "What kind of promise?" "That we'd look after his land until you came back. He never stopped believing you'd return someday." Marlowe met his eyes steadily. So for 15 years, my ranch has been managing your property. We've maintained the fences, kept squatters off, made sure the water rights were protected. It cost us money and time, but my father gave his word, and when he died, I kept that promise. Presley sat back, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was saying. Why would your father do that? Because Thomas Novak saved his life once, years before you were born. There was a ranch war brewing, and Thomas stepped in, risked everything to broker peace. My father never forgot that debt. Marlowe's voice softened slightly. And because they were friends, real friends, the kind who keep their promises even when it's hard. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. The land is yours, free and clear, but you should know that your property shares water with mine. There's a spring that feeds both our ranches. Your father and mine had an agreement about how to share it fairly. I'd like to maintain that agreement if you're planning to stay. Of course, Presley said immediately. More than fair, considering what you've done. There's something else. Marlowe hesitated, a slight tension in her shoulders. 3 months ago, a man named Richard Sutton showed up in town. He's from back east, lots of money, looking to buy up land. He made me an offer for the Edwards ranch. I turned him down. Then he started asking about your father's property. Wanting to buy it, wanting to claim it. He hired lawyers, tried to argue that abandoned property reverts to the territory after a certain number of years. The only reason he didn't succeed is because I could prove we'd been actively maintaining it under your father's instructions. But he's not going to give up easily. Once he knows you're back, he'll either try to buy you out or find some other way to get what he wants. Presley felt anger building in his chest. What does he want with the land? There's been talk of the railroad coming through. If it does, it'll run right between your property and mine. Land here would become very valuable, but that's not for a few years yet if it happens at all. Marlowe stood and ladled stew into their bowls. Eat, you must be hungry. The stew was excellent, rich and flavorful. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Presley found himself stealing glances at Marlowe, trying to reconcile this capable, beautiful woman with the blank space in his childhood memories. I'm sorry, he said finally. I should remember you. We must have known each other when we were kids. Marlowe's expression turned wry. We did, but you wouldn't have noticed me. What do you mean? I mean I was 3 years younger than you, skinny as a fence post with braids and freckles. You were the older Novak boy, too busy with your friends and your horses to pay attention to Jonathan Edwards's little daughter. There was no bitterness in her voice, just statement of fact. The few times we crossed paths, you looked right through me. Presley felt his face heat with embarrassment. I'm sorry. Don't be, you were a kid. Kids don't notice everything. She smiled slightly. Though I noticed you, I thought you were the most handsome boy I'd ever seen. I used to watch you ride past our ranch and imagine you'd stop and talk to me someday. And now I'm 35 years old, and I stopped waiting for boys to notice me a long time ago. Marlowe's voice was matter of fact, but something in her eyes suggested the old wound hadn't entirely healed. I built my life around this ranch. It's enough. But as Presley looked at her across the table, he thought it wasn't enough, not for someone like Marlowe Edwards. She deserved someone who saw her, really saw her. And he was beginning to realize that he couldn't look away. They talked late into the evening. Marlowe told him about the state of his father's ranch, the repairs that would be needed, the cattle that had wandered off over the years. She had detailed records of everything, kept with meticulous care. She told him about the town, about the people who'd stayed and the ones who'd left, about the dry years and the good years, about the constant struggle to make a living from the harsh desert land. In turn, Presley found himself telling her about his 20 years away. The cattle drives, the men he'd worked with, the towns he'd seen from Texas to Montana. The blizzards in Wyoming, the stampedes in Kansas, the river crossings that had nearly killed him more times than he could count. The reputation he'd built as a trail boss who could get cattle to market when others failed. Why did you stay away so long? Marlowe asked quietly. Presley was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. Pride, he said finally, and fear. I left angry, convinced my father didn't understand me. Then years passed, and I was afraid it was too late to make things right. I kept telling myself I'd come back next year when I'd made enough money, when I'd proved myself. But there was always another drive, another reason to wait. And then he was gone, and I'd waited too long. He knew you'd come back eventually, Marlowe said. He told my father that, said you had too much Novak in you to stay away forever. I should have come back while he was alive. Maybe, but you're here now. Marlowe stood and began clearing the dishes. The question is, what are you going to do? Are you staying, or are you going to sell to Sutton and move on? Presley stood too, helping her carry dishes to the wash basin. I'm staying. This is my home. I didn't realize how much I missed it until I saw those mountains again. It won't be easy. The ranch has been empty a long time. It'll take work to get it running again. I'm not afraid of work. Marlowe turned to look at him, and for a moment they stood close in the warm kitchen, close enough that Presley could smell the faint scent of soap and sage on her skin. Her eyes searched his face as if looking for something. What? He asked softly. Just trying to reconcile the boy I remember with the man standing in my kitchen, she said. You've changed. So have you, though I'm ashamed to say I can't remember the girl you were. That's all right, I like who I've become better anyway. She turned back to the dishes. You should ride over to your father's place tomorrow, see it in daylight. I'll go with you if you want. Show you what we've done. I'd like that. Presley rode back to town that night with his head full of Marlowe Edwards. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd stood in the street with that rifle, fearless and sure. The way she'd run her ranch alone for 5 years after her father's death. The way she'd kept her promise to his father, even though Presley had given her no reason to believe he'd ever come back. The way her eyes had softened when she talked about watching him ride past her ranch as a girl. He'd spent 20 years moving from place to place, never putting down roots, never letting anyone get too close. He'd told himself it was because the trail was his life, because he liked the freedom of moving on when the drive was done. But lying in bed at the boarding house, listening to the sounds of Vulture City at night, he wondered if he'd just been running from the same thing he was running toward. Home. Belonging. Someone to see him, really see him, and Marlowe Edwards saw him. He didn't know how he knew that, but he did. When she looked at him, it wasn't with the calculation he was used to from people sizing up his worth or his reputation. It was something deeper, more honest. He was in trouble, he realized. Deep trouble. Because he was falling for a woman who'd stopped waiting for him 20 years ago, a woman who'd built a life that didn't need him, and he had no idea if she'd be willing to let him in. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the way mornings in Arizona always did. Presley was up early, eager to see his father's land. Marlowe had said she'd meet him at the Edwards Ranch at 8, and he arrived with 10 minutes to spare. She was waiting on the porch, back in her practical riding clothes, her hair braided down her back. 2 horses were saddled and ready. Figured we'd ride the boundary first, she said as he dismounted. Give you a sense of the full property, then we'll head to the ranch house. They rode out together, and Marlowe proved to be an excellent guide. She knew every inch of the land, pointing out landmarks, water sources, the places where the fence needed repair. Presley found himself watching her as much as the land, mesmerized by the easy way she sat her horse, the way she gestured as she talked, completely comfortable in her element. The Novak Ranch was bigger than he remembered, sprawling across several thousand acres of desert and scrubland. It wasn't prime land by most standards, but it was good enough for cattle if you knew how to work it. And his father had known. Even after 15 years of sitting empty, Presley could see the bones of a successful operation. They came over a rise, and there it was, the ranch house where Presley had grown up. It was smaller than he remembered, the way childhood places always were, but it was still standing. Adobe walls, a pitched roof, a porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. The corrals were in disrepair and the windows were shuttered, but the structure was sound. Presley dismounted slowly, emotions churning in his chest. How many times had he run across that yard as a boy? How many times had his father stood on that porch, watching the sun come up? "We've kept the roof patched," Marlowe said quietly. "Made sure the walls stayed solid, but we didn't go inside. That was your father's private space. It didn't feel right." Presley walked up the porch steps, each board creaking under his weight. The door was locked, but he had the key the lawyer had sent him. It turned stiffly in the lock, and the door swung open with a groan. The interior was dim and dusty, but intact. His father's furniture was still there, covered in dust but recognizable. The table where they'd eaten meals. The rocking chair by the fireplace. The simple wooden cross on the wall that had belonged to Presley's mother, who died when he was young. He walked through the rooms slowly, memory after memory washing over him. His father had lived here alone for years after Presley left. Had he sat in that chair by the fire, wondering if his son would ever come home? Had he looked at that empty second bedroom and hoped Marlowe stayed on the porch, giving him privacy? When Presley finally emerged, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he said roughly. "For taking care of this, for keeping his memory alive." "Your father was a good man," Marlowe said simply. "He deserved better than he got. He deserved a better son. He got the son he got, and he loved you anyway. That's what fathers do." She touched his arm briefly, a gesture of comfort. "Come on, let's ride up to the spring. I want to show you the water situation." The spring was on the northern edge of the Novak property, bubbling up from an underground source and feeding a small creek that ran between the two ranches before eventually disappearing into the desert. It was the lifeblood of both properties, precious in this arid land. "Your father and mine built this system together," Marlowe explained, pointing to the series of small dams and channels that directed the water. "Ensures both ranches get an equal share. In dry years, we have to be careful, ration it out, but it's never failed completely. It's a good system," Presley said, impressed by the engineering. "They must have spent years perfecting it." "They did. And they agreed that no matter what, neither ranch would ever cut the other off from water. It was more than a business agreement. It was a bond between neighbors, between friends." Marlowe looked at him seriously. "That's why I'm hoping you'll honor it." "Of course I will. You have my word." Relief flickered across her face. "Good. Because Richard Sutton's been trying to convince me to rechannel the water, cut off the flow to your property. Offered me a lot of money. But I won't break my father's word, and I won't break your father's trust." Anger surged through Presley again at the mention of Sutton. "This man sounds like trouble." "He is, and he'll be even more trouble once he knows you're back." Marlowe's jaw set stubbornly. "But we'll deal with him together. Two ranches are stronger than one." "Together," Presley agreed, liking the sound of that word on his lips. They spent the rest of the morning riding the property, and Presley began to form a plan. It would take months of hard work to get the ranch operational again. He'd need to hire hands, buy cattle, repair the buildings and fences. But it was possible. More than possible. And having Marlowe as a neighbor, an ally, someone who knew this land intimately, that would make all the difference. As the sun climbed high and the heat became oppressive, they rode back toward the Edwards ranch. Marlowe offered him lunch, and Presley accepted gratefully. They ate on her shaded porch, cold water and sandwiches, talking about the work ahead. "I can recommend some good ranch hands," Marlowe said. "Men who know the area, know how to work cattle in the desert, and if you need help with the heavy repairs, my men can spare some time." "We help our neighbors here. I'll pay fair wages," Presley said. "I know you will, your father's son." She smiled at him, and Presley felt his heart skip. God, she was beautiful when she smiled, her whole face lighting up with warmth. A rider appeared on the road, heading toward them at a fast clip. Marlowe stood, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle she kept near the door. "That's one of my hands," she said. "Juan, something must be wrong." The rider, the same Mexican man who'd taken Presley's horse the night before, pulled up in a cloud of dust. He spoke rapidly in Spanish, and Marlowe's face darkened. "What is it?" Presley asked. "Trouble at the north fence line. Someone's cut the wire." She turned to Juan. "How bad?" Bad patrona, maybe 50 feet down, and tracks many horses. Rustlers? Presley asked. Maybe, or Sutton's men. Marlowe was already moving, grabbing her rifle, calling orders in Spanish. 3 more ranch hands appeared from the bunkhouse, saddling fresh horses. "I'm coming with you," Presley said. Marlowe looked like she might argue, but then nodded curtly. "Juan, get him a fresh horse. Move." Within minutes, they were riding hard toward the northern fence line, Marlowe leading the way with the easy confidence of someone who'd dealt with ranch trouble before. Presley pushed his borrowed horse to keep up, impressed by her command of the situation. The cut fence was just where Juan had said it would be, a long section of wire snipped clean through. The posts were intact, but the wire lay on the ground, leaving a wide gap. And beyond it, Presley could see what looked like cattle tracks heading north into open range. Marlowe dismounted and examined the ground, her face grim. "Shod horses, at least 6 of them, and they took some of my cattle, maybe 20 head judging by these tracks. Can we follow them?" Presley asked. "We can try, but they've got several hours on us." She looked at her ranch hands. "Juan, Miguel, you stay here and start repairing this fence. Carlos, you ride back to town, tell Sheriff Morrison what happened. Presley and I will follow the trail as far as we can." "I can handle this alone," Marlowe added, looking at Presley. "You don't have to come." "I know I don't have to." "I want to." Something passed between them, unspoken but powerful. Marlowe nodded once, then swung back into her saddle. "Let's ride." They followed the tracks north into rougher country where the sparse grass gave way to rock and sand. The trail was clear enough at first, but as the ground grew harder, it became more difficult to follow. Marlowe never hesitated, reading signs that Presley would have missed, tracking with the skill of someone who'd grown up on this land. After 2 hours, they came to a small canyon. The tracks led into it, but there were no signs of the cattle or the rustlers. Marlowe reined in, studying the situation. "They could be anywhere in there," she said. "Could be waiting to ambush anyone following. We should wait for the sheriff." "Agreed," Presley said. He'd been in enough tight spots to know when caution was called for. They dismounted to rest the horses and sat in the shade of a large boulder, sharing water from Marlowe's canteen. The heat was brutal, shimmering off the rocks in visible waves. "Does this happen often?" Presley asked. Rustling. "Not as much as it used to, but we've had a few incidents in the past months. Always small groups, always professional. They know what they're doing." Marlowe took a drink and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I've wondered if it's connected to Sutton." "Way to weaken me, make me more likely to sell." "That's a serious accusation, I know, and I can't prove it, but my gut tells me there's a connection." She looked at him. "You should know what you're getting into coming back here. It's not just hard work. There are people who don't want to see us succeed." "All the more reason to stick together," Presley said. He meant it. The thought of Marlowe facing these troubles alone made something protective rise in his chest. They rode back to the fence line as the afternoon began to cool. Sheriff Morrison was there with 2 deputies examining the cut wire. He looked up as they approached. "Lost the trail in the rocks," Marlowe reported. "They went into Dead Man Canyon, could be holed up anywhere." Morrison nodded. "We'll organize a proper search party, but not today." Too late to go in there safely. Morning would be better. He looked at the repaired fence where Juan and Miguel had worked fast to string new wire. "This is the 3rd ranch hit this month. Someone's running an organized operation. You thinking it's Sutton?" Marlowe asked bluntly. "I'm thinking I don't have proof of anything," Morrison said carefully. "But I'm keeping my eyes open. And I'd advise you to post guards at night, just in case they come back." After the sheriff left, Marlowe turned to her ranch hands and began organizing the guard schedule in Spanish. Presley watched her take charge, and something clicked into place in his mind. This was what he'd been missing all those years on the trail. Not just a home, but someone to build something with. Someone strong enough to stand beside him, not behind him. "I can take a guard shift," he offered. Marlowe looked surprised. "You've got your own ranch to worry about." which sits empty and won't be bothered. Let me help. You don't owe me anything, Presley. Maybe not, but I want to help anyway. He held her gaze. Let me. After a long moment she nodded, all right. You can take the midnight to dawn shift with Miguel. He'll show you the route. That night, Presley learned what it meant to guard a ranch in the Arizona desert. He and Miguel rode a slow circuit around the Edwards property, checking fences, watching for any sign of trouble. The desert was alive with night sounds. Coyotes calling, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the occasional hoot of an owl. Miguel was a man of few words, but he knew the land. He showed Presley the places rustlers were most likely to strike, the hidden approaches, the vulnerable spots. It was education Presley needed, and he absorbed it all as dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They rode back to the ranch house. Marlowe was already up, making coffee in the kitchen. She looked tired but determined. Quiet night? She asked. Quiet, Presley confirmed. He accepted the coffee she offered, their fingers brushing briefly. The touch sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the caffeine. Thank you, Marlowe said softly, for staying, for helping. Anytime. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern developed. Presley spent his days working on his father's ranch, hiring the men Marlowe recommended, beginning the slow process of repairs and restoration. But his evenings and nights were spent at the Edwards ranch, helping with guard duty, sharing meals with Marlowe, talking late into the night on her porch. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their regrets. Marlowe told him about the loneliness of running a ranch alone, the way some men in town thought a woman had no business doing such work. Presley told her about the emptiness of constant moving, never having a place that felt like home. And slowly, carefully, they began to build something between them. It started with friendship, with respect, with the easy camaraderie of two people who understood hard work and the land. But underneath that, something deeper was growing. Presley found himself looking for excuses to see her. He'd ride over with a question about fence repair that he already knew the answer to. He'd offer to help with tasks she could easily handle herself. And Marlowe, he noticed, never turned him away. She'd smile when she saw him coming, that warm smile that lit up her face, and his heart would lift. The search for the rustlers turned up nothing. The cattle were gone, and the trail had gone cold. Sheriff Morrison kept investigating, but without evidence, there was little he could do. Marlowe took the loss philosophically. It happens, she said when Presley expressed his anger on her behalf. You can't run a ranch without accepting that some things are beyond your control. Whether disease, thieves, you deal with it and move on. But Presley noticed she didn't let her guard down. The nightly patrols continued, and she kept her rifle close at all times. 3 weeks after Presley's return to Vulture City, Richard Sutton finally made his appearance. Presley was at his father's ranch, supervising the installation of new roof beams, when Juan rode up fast. "Señor, there is trouble at the Edwards ranch. The patrona sent me to fetch you." Presley was on his horse in seconds, riding hard toward Marlowe's property. He found her on the porch, facing down a well-dressed man on an expensive bay horse. 2 other men flanked him, both armed and looking like they knew how to use their weapons. "You must be Presley Novak," the well-dressed man said as Presley dismounted. He had cold eyes and the kind of smile that never reached them. "Richard Sutton, I've been hoping to meet you." "I'm sure you have," Presley said, moving to stand beside Marlowe on the porch. She shot him a grateful glance. "I've been trying to explain to Miss Edwards that I'm prepared to make both of you very generous offers for your properties," Sutton continued smoothly. "Combined, your ranches would make an ideal location for development once the railroad comes through." "The ranches aren't for sale," Marlowe said flatly. "Not for sale now," Sutton amended. "But circumstances change. Running a ranch is hard work, especially for a woman alone. And Mr. Novak, you've been gone 20 years. Do you really want to spend your remaining years struggling with land that barely supports cattle?" "My remaining years are none of your concern," Presley said, keeping his voice level. "The lady said no. I'm saying no. That should be clear enough." Sutton's smile tightened. You should know that I don't take no for an answer. I have ways of getting what I want. That sounds like a threat, Marlowe said, her hand moving casually toward her rifle. Not a threat. A fact. Sutton gathered his reins. Think about my offer. You'll find I'm very persuasive when I need to be. He rode off with his men, leaving a tension in the air. Well, Marlowe said after they'd disappeared down the road. That was unpleasant. He's trouble, Presley said. The worst kind, rich, connected, and used to getting his way. I've handled his type before. Not alone, not anymore. Presley turned to face her fully. Whatever happens with Sutton, we face it together. Agreed. Marlowe looked at him for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. Why are you doing this, Presley? You don't owe me anything. You could sell your land to Sutton, take the money, go back to wherever you've been. Why stay and fight? Because this is my home, he said simply. And because I'm tired of running. Is that the only reason? The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Presley took a breath, knowing he was about to step off a cliff he couldn't climb back from. No, he said quietly. It's not the only reason. The truth is, Marlowe, I can't seem to look away from you. From the moment you stood in that street with your rifle, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. About how strong you are, how capable, how beautiful. About how I spent 20 years running away from everything that mattered, and now I've found something worth staying for. Marlowe's breath caught, her eyes widening. Presley. I know I have no right, he continued, the words spilling out now that he'd started. I know I'm 20 years too late. I know you built a life that doesn't need me, but I'm hoping maybe you might want me anyway. Not because you need help or protection, but just because of this thing between us. Because I see you, Marlowe, really see you, and I like everything I see. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. I stopped waiting for you when I was 15 years old, she said softly. Told myself that the boy I'd watched ride past my ranch wasn't ever going to notice me, and I needed to build my life around that fact. I did build that life. Made it strong, made it mine. But Presley, that doesn't mean I don't want you in it, because the truth is, I do. I want you in it so much it scares me. Relief and joy flooded through Presley so strongly his knees felt weak. It scares me too, he admitted. I've never felt this way about anyone. Never wanted to stay anywhere badly enough to face that fear, but I want to stay for you, with you. This is crazy, Marlowe said, but she was smiling now, that beautiful warm smile. We barely know each other. We know enough. We know we can work together. We know we respect each other. We know there's something here worth exploring. He squeezed her hand gently. The rest we can figure out as we go. Marlowe laughed, the sound bright in the desert air. You're right, we can figure it out. Then, more seriously, but Presley, I won't give up who I am. I won't stop running my ranch or making my own decisions. If we do this, it has to be as equals. I wouldn't want it any other way, Presley said honestly. I don't want someone who needs me to be complete. I want someone who chooses me even though they're already complete on their own. That's you, Marlowe, that's exactly you. She reached up and touched his face, her calloused palm gentle against his cheek. Then I choose you, she said. And I'm choosing to kiss you right now if that's all right. More than all right, Presley said, and then her lips were on his, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was everything Presley hadn't known he needed. Sweet and fierce at the same time, full of promise and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, he whispered. I think I'm falling in love with you too, Marlowe whispered back, which is terrifying and wonderful at the same time. They stood on the porch holding each other as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. And Presley thought that all those years of running, all those lonely nights on the trail, had been worth it if they'd led him here, to this moment, to this woman. Of course, Sutton wasn't going to give up easily. Over the next month, trouble escalated. More fences were cut, this time on both ranches. A water tank on Presley's property was mysteriously shot full of holes, requiring expensive repairs. Someone spooked Marlowe's horses one night, sending them stampeding across the desert. It took 2 days to round them all up. Sheriff Morrison investigated each incident but could find no proof connecting Sutton to any of it. The man was careful, using hired hands who couldn't be traced back to him. "We could hire guards," Presley said one evening as he and Marlowe sat on her porch, reviewing the latest damages. "With what money?" Marlowe asked tiredly. "These accidents are costing us both, that's the point. Wear us down until we're too broke to keep fighting." Presley thought about the money he'd saved from 20 years of trail work. It was substantial enough to keep both ranches running for a while, but Marlowe was proud, and he knew she wouldn't accept charity. "What if we combined operations?" he said slowly, the idea forming as he spoke. "Pool our resources, our cattle, our men. 2 ranches working as one unit would be more efficient, harder to sabotage." Marlowe looked at him sharply. "That's a big step." "I know, but it makes sense, doesn't it? We're already working together. This would just make it official." "Official how?" Presley took a breath. They'd been courting in the old-fashioned sense for a month now. Stolen kisses, long talks, holding hands on the porch, but they hadn't talked about the future, both of them careful not to push too hard. "I think you know how," he said quietly. "Marlowe, marry me." Not because of Sutton or the ranches or any practical reason. "Marry me because I love you, because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. Because I want to build a life with you, a real life, the kind I never thought I'd have." Marlowe's eyes filled with tears. "That's not much of a proposal. You didn't even get down on one knee." "You're right." Presley stood and went down on one knee right there on the porch, taking her hand. "Marlowe Edwards, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and support you and stand beside you for whatever years we have left? Will you trust me with your heart the way I'm trusting you with mine?" "Yes," Marlowe said, the tears spilling over now. "Yes, you impossible man. Of course I'll marry you." Presley stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and relief and joy he felt. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair, and for a long, perfect moment, nothing else mattered. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Vulture City. Sheriff Morrison gave Marlowe away, and Juan stood up as Presley's best man. Half the town turned out, genuinely happy for the couple everyone had started to think of as their own. Richard Sutton didn't attend, but he sent a telegram. "Congratulations on your marriage. My offer still stands." "Persistent bastard," Presley muttered, crumpling the telegram. "Forget him," Marlowe said, radiant in a simple white dress. "This is our day," and it was. They celebrated with dancing and food and music, the whole town coming together in the way small communities did. As Presley danced with his new wife under the Arizona stars, he couldn't remember ever being this happy. They spent their wedding night at the Edwards Ranch, which they'd agreed would become their primary home while they worked to restore the Novak property. In the privacy of their bedroom, Marlowe's confidence seemed to falter slightly. "I've never." She started, then stopped, blushing. "I know," Presley said gently. "Neither have I, not like this, not with someone I love, really." She looked skeptical. "There were women on the trail," he admitted. "But nothing that mattered, nothing that meant anything. This is different, you're different." He took his time, gentle and patient, and Marlowe matched him with a passion that took his breath away. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the sheets, Presley felt a completeness he'd never experienced. This was what he'd been searching for all those years. This sense of home, of belonging, of being exactly where he was meant to be. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," Marlowe whispered back. "My husband." The word sent a thrill through him. Husband, he was someone's husband, Marlowe's husband. It felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Combining the ranches proved to be the right decision. With their resources pooled and Presley's money from his trail days, they were able to weather Sutton's continued harassment. The harassment itself became less frequent as it became clear the newlyweds weren't going to be easily intimidated. Presley threw himself into learning everything he could about desert ranching. It was different from the trail work he'd done, requiring different skills, different knowledge. Marlowe was a patient teacher, and her ranch hands accepted him once they saw he was willing to learn and work hard. By their 6-month anniversary, the combined ranch was thriving. They'd bought new cattle, repaired all the damaged fences, and even expanded their herd. The Novak ranch house had been restored, and they'd turned it into housing for their ranch hands, while keeping the Edwards house as their home. Life fell into a rhythm. Hard work during the day, quiet evenings together on the porch, nights wrapped in each other's arms. Presley had never known such contentment existed, and watching Marlowe move through their life with that same strength and grace that had first captured his attention, he fell more in love with her every day. Then Marlowe started feeling sick in the mornings. At first she tried to hide it, but Presley noticed. He noticed everything about her now. The way she turned pale at breakfast, the way she excused herself to be sick, the way she looked tired even after a full night's sleep. "You need to see a doctor," he said, worry gnawing at him. "It's nothing," Marlowe insisted. "Just tired. It's been a hard few months." But when it continued for 2 weeks, even she couldn't deny something was wrong. They rode into Vulture City together, and Marlowe saw Doc Harrison, the town's physician. Presley waited outside the examination room, pacing, his mind conjuring terrible possibilities. What if she was seriously ill? What if he'd just found her only to lose her? When Marlowe emerged, her face was unreadable. Doc Harrison followed her out, smiling. "Congratulations, Novak," he said, shaking Presley's hand. "You're going to be a father." Presley's brain seemed to stop working. "What? I'm pregnant," Marlowe said, and now he could see she was smiling too, a wondering, joyful smile. "We're having a baby." Joy exploded through Presley so powerfully he thought he might burst. He picked Marlowe up and spun her around right there in the doctor's office, making her laugh and slap his shoulder. "Put me down, you crazy man." "We're having a baby," Presley said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "A baby, Marlowe, our baby?" "I know," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "I can't quite believe it either." They rode home in a daze, talking excitedly about the future. A nursery to set up, baby clothes to make, a name to choose. All the things Presley had never let himself think about suddenly seemed not just possible but real. That night, lying in bed with Marlowe curled against him, Presley thought about his father. Thomas Novak would have loved this, would have been thrilled to know his son had finally come home, had married, was starting a family. Grief and joy tangled in Presley's chest, bittersweet but somehow right. "I wish my father could have known," he said softly. Marlowe took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "He knew you'd come back, he believed in you, that's something." "It is," Presley agreed. "And I'll make sure our child knows about both grandfathers." Thomas Novak and Jonathan Edwards, 2 good men who built something lasting in this hard land. "That's a good plan," Marlowe murmured, already drifting toward sleep. Presley lay awake a while longer, his hand resting on his wife's stomach, thinking about the life growing there. His child. Their child. A new generation to carry on what their fathers had built. The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though Marlowe hated having to slow down. She insisted on continuing to work the ranch, just at a more moderate pace, and Presley learned not to argue. She knew her body, knew her limits, and she'd tell him if she needed help. Sutton made one more attempt to buy them out when he learned about the baby. "A child changes things," he said, appearing at their ranch one morning. "You'll want security, stability, I can offer that. Enough money that you'd never have to worry again." "We're not worried now," Marlowe said, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. It was 7 months along now, visible proof of the life they'd created. "Our child will grow up on this land just like we did. They'll learn what it means to work hard, to keep your word, to stand by your neighbors. Those are lessons you can't buy with money." "You're making a mistake," Sutton said coldly. "That's our right," Presley said. "Now get off our land." After that, Sutton seemed to give up. Whether he'd moved on to other pursuits or was just biding his time, they didn't know. But the harassment stopped, and they were able to focus on preparing for the baby. Marlowe went into labor on a blazing hot August afternoon. They'd been expecting it, Doc Harrison had said any day now, but when the contractions started, Presley still felt a spike of panic. "I'll get the doctor," he said, already moving toward the door. "Presley." Marlowe's voice stopped him. "It's going to be fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I know, but you're not just any woman. You're my woman, my wife, and I love you more than anything." "I love you too," Marlowe said, smiling despite the pain. "Now go get Doc Harrison before this baby decides to come without him." The labor was long and difficult. Presley waited outside the bedroom, pacing, praying, nearly going mad with worry every time he heard Marlowe cry out. Juan sat with him, offering quiet support, and several ranch hands gathered in the yard, waiting for news. Finally, as the sun was setting, painting the sky in those brilliant Arizona colors, a baby's cry pierced the air. Presley nearly collapsed with relief. Doc Harrison opened the door, grinning. "You can come in now, Papa." Presley rushed in to find Marlowe propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with so much love in her eyes that his throat tightened. "Come meet your son," she said softly. "A son." Presley moved to the bed on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blanket. His son. His and Marlowe's son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air, already protesting the world he'd just entered. "He's perfect," Presley whispered. "He's ours," Marlowe said, and there was wonder in her voice. They named him Thomas Jonathan after both grandfathers. Tommy, they called him, and from the start, he was a force of nature. Strong lungs, strong will, always wanting to be in the middle of whatever was happening. Presley discovered depths of love he hadn't known existed. He thought he couldn't love Marlowe more, but watching her with their son, seeing the tenderness in her eyes as she nursed him, the gentle way she sang lullabies in the middle of the night, his heart seemed to expand to hold even more. And being a father changed him in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Every decision he made now was with Tommy's future in mind. The ranch wasn't just land anymore, it was legacy, something to pass down to his son and hopefully future grandchildren. The years that followed were full and rich. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious boy, always underfoot, always asking questions. 2 years after Tommy's birth, Marlowe gave them a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn streak, and Presley adored her. The ranch continued to prosper. Word spread about the quality of their cattle, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase their stock. They hired more hands, expanded their operations, and became one of the most successful ranches in the territory. But more important than the success was the life they built. The love they shared, the family they raised, the community they were part of. Presley had been right all those years ago when he'd felt that sense of home. This was home, not just the land, but the people, the life, the love. Sutton eventually moved on, his railroad deal falling through when the planned route changed. Last Presley heard, he was in California trying to buy up land there. Good riddance. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Presley and Marlowe rode up to the spring where the two ranches met. It was their place, where they often went when they needed to talk or just be together away from the demands of the ranch and children. "Do you ever regret it?" Presley asked, watching the water bubble up from the ground. "Marrying me, tying yourself to someone who was gone for 20 years. "Never," Marlowe said immediately. "You came back exactly when you were supposed to. Any earlier and we both would have been different people. We wouldn't have been ready." "Maybe," Presley said, "but I regret all those years I didn't know you, all the time I wasted." "You weren't wasting time. You were becoming who you needed to be." Marlowe took his hand. "And I was becoming who I needed to be, so that when we found each other again, we were ready to build something real." Presley pulled her close, kissing her with the passion that had never faded. If anything, their physical connection had only grown stronger over the years, deepened by love and trust and shared experience. "I love you," he said against her lips. More every day. I love you too, Marlowe said. My husband, my partner, my best friend. They sat by the spring as the sun set, talking about their children, their plans for the ranch, their dreams for the future. And Presley thought about the boy he'd been, angry and restless, running from the one place he belonged. That boy had needed to leave, needed to prove himself, needed to find his own way. But the man he'd become had needed to come home, needed to find Marlowe, to build this life, to become a husband and father. And he was grateful for both journeys, the leaving and the returning, because they'd led him here. Tommy was 15 now, already taller than his mother, learning to run the ranch with the same dedication his parents brought to it. Sarah was 13, as comfortable on a horse as her mother, with a quick mind that Presley knew would take her far, whether she chose to stay on the ranch or pursue other dreams. They had 2 more children now, twin boys named Marcus and Mitchell, aged 7 and full of mischief. The ranch house they'd built to replace the smaller original structure was always full of noise and life and love. Presley was 58 years old, his hair going gray, his body bearing the marks of a lifetime of hard work. But he'd never felt more alive, more grateful, more blessed. He thought about that day in Vulture City when he'd hidden behind the water trough, bullets flying over his head. Thought about Marlowe stepping into the street with her rifle, saving him before he even knew he needed saving. She'd been saving him ever since in ways big and small. Saving him from loneliness, from emptiness, from a life that had no meaning beyond the next trail, the next town, the next drive. And he'd saved her too, he knew. From the isolation of running a ranch alone, from the weight of bearing all the responsibility herself, from a life that was strong but solitary, they'd saved each other. And in doing so, they'd built something beautiful. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons, the growing children, the steady rhythm of ranch life. Tommy married at 22, bringing home a smart, capable woman named Catherine who fit into the family like she'd always been there. They gave Presley and Marlowe their first grandchild, a boy named Thomas Jr., and Presley discovered that being a grandfather was somehow even better than being a father. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to study law. There was a university in Phoenix now, and she was determined to go. Presley and Marlowe supported her decision, proud of their daughter's ambition even though it meant she'd be leaving the ranch. The twins showed every sign of staying, though. They loved the land the way Presley and Marlowe did, with a fierce devotion that went beyond words. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, ranch hands past and present, neighbors from miles around. It was a testament to the life Presley and Marlowe had built, the community they'd fostered, the love they'd shared. As Presley looked around at the crowd filling their home and yard, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this, all these people, this joy, this love, it had started with a woman stepping into the street with a rifle, fearless and strong. "What are you thinking?" Marlowe asked, sliding her hand into his. She was 62 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her face lined with years of sun and smiles. She was more beautiful to him than she'd been at 35. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Presley said. "How lucky we are." "Pretty lucky," Marlowe agreed. "Though I'd say it was more than luck. We worked for this, we fought for it, we chose it every single day." "We did," Presley said, "and I'd choose it again in a heartbeat. I'd choose you again in a heartbeat." "Good," Marlowe said, her eyes twinkling, "because you're stuck with me, Presley Novak." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Presley said, and kissed his wife in front of everyone, making their grandchildren giggle and their children groan in mock embarrassment. As the celebration continued around them, music and laughter filling the air, Presley held Marlowe close and thought about the wild west they'd lived through. The danger, the hardship, the constant struggle. But also the beauty, the freedom, the possibility. It was a time and place that demanded everything from its people. But for those who were willing to work, to sacrifice, to stand firm in the face of challenges, It offered rewards beyond measure. Presley had found his reward in Marlowe, in their children, in this land they'd built a life on. He'd found it in the simple joy of waking up each morning beside the woman he loved, in watching the sun rise over the Vulture Mountains, in knowing he was exactly where he belonged. He'd spent 20 years running, searching for something he couldn't name. And he'd found it in the last place he'd expected: home. Not the home he'd left as an angry 18-year-old, but the home he'd built as a man with a woman who'd once watched him ride past and dreamed he might notice her. He noticed her now. He couldn't look away. And he never would, for all the days they had left. The years turned as they always did. Presley and Marlowe grew older together, watching their children build their own lives, watching their grandchildren grow, and eventually watching great-grandchildren come into the world. The ranch passed gradually into Tommy's capable hands, with the twins working alongside him, all of them maintaining the standards Presley and Marlowe had set. Presley was 73, Marlowe 70, when they rode up to the spring one last time together. It took them longer now, their bodies not as strong as they once were, but they made the journey because it mattered. This place had always been theirs, sacred in its own way. "Do you remember," Marlowe said, sitting on the rock where they'd sat so many times before, "when you proposed to me?" "Right here by this spring." "Of course I remember," Presley said, settling beside her with a groan. His joints ached these days, but he didn't mind. Each ache was earned, a testament to a life fully lived. "You cried, you never cry." "I was happy," Marlowe said, "happier than I'd ever been." "And now, still happy," Marlowe said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Presley, even the hard days. Maybe especially the hard days because we faced them together." Presley wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "I love you, Marlowe Novak. Today, tomorrow, and whatever comes after." "I love you too," Marlowe whispered, "always and forever." They sat by the spring as the sun set one more time, painting the sky in those brilliant Arizona colors. The same colors that had lit their wedding night, that had witnessed the births of their children, that had marked every important moment of their lives together. And in that moment, Presley felt complete. His journey had taken him far from home and brought him back again. It had led him through danger and difficulty, through loneliness and loss. But it had also led him to love, to family, to a life richer than he'd ever imagined possible. He'd grown up on a ranch in the Arizona desert, neighbors with a girl he never noticed. 20 years later, he'd returned to find a woman he couldn't look away from, and in finding her, he'd found everything he'd been searching for: home, love, purpose, family, legacy. All of it wrapped up in the fierce, beautiful, capable woman sitting beside him, the woman who'd stepped into the street with a rifle and changed his life forever. The woman who'd saved him. The woman he'd saved in return. The woman who'd been his partner, his love, his everything for 35 wonderful years. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, Presley and Marlowe rode home together, side by side, the way they'd done everything since the day they'd chosen each other. And when their time finally came, years later they went peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they'd lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The Novak Ranch, combined with the Edwards property, remained in the family for generations. The spring continued to flow, providing water to sustain cattle and crops and life. The mountains stood eternal, watching over the land they'd always guarded. And in the family stories told around dinner tables, in the memories passed down from grandparents to grandchildren to great-grandchildren, Presley and Marlowe lived on. Their love story became legend, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for, that real love is built on respect and partnership, and that coming home isn't always about the place you left behind, but about finding the person who makes anywhere feel like home. They'd grown up on neighboring ranches and he'd never noticed her. 20 years later, he couldn't look away, and in that looking, in that seeing, they'd built something beautiful, something lasting, something real. A love story for the ages, played out under the vast Arizona sky, in the hard and beautiful landscape of the Wild West. A story of two strong people who'd found each other at exactly the right time, who'd chosen each other every day, who'd built a life together that honored both their families' legacies while creating something entirely their own. It was a story of courage and determination, of facing challenges together, of never giving up on the land or each other. It was a story of passion that endured through decades, growing deeper and richer with each passing year. It was a story of family, of children raised with love and strength, of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward the values their ancestors had lived by. Most of all, it was a story of love. Pure, true, enduring love. The kind of love that transforms lives, that makes hard work feel like joy, that turns a house into a home and a piece of land into a legacy. Presley Novak had spent 20 years searching for something he couldn't name. And Marlowe Edwards had spent 20 years building a life she could be proud of. When they found each other, everything clicked into place. The searching stopped. The building became something they did together, and the life they created became more than either of them could have achieved alone. In the end, that's what love does. It doesn't complete us, we're already complete. But it multiplies us, amplifies us, makes us more than we were. It gives us someone to share the burdens and double the joys. It gives us a reason to be better, to work harder, to face each day with hope and determination. Presley and Marlowe had that kind of love, and they lived that kind of life. Under the Arizona sun, in the shadow of the Vulture Mountains, on the land their fathers had worked and they had combined, they wrote their story together. It was a story worth telling, a story worth remembering. A story of the Wild West, when life was hard but possibilities were endless, when strong people carved out their places in an unforgiving land and built something lasting. It was their story, and it was perfect.